The last transmission from the Galactic Council still echoed in Imad's mind as his ship's docking procedures completed. The Austrian contribution to our alliance remains insufficient. The diplomatic wave saying what everyone already knew. His species was too weak to be worth protecting. One by one, their allies had withdrawn support, citing resource limitations or strategic realignment, all except humanity, who had not only maintained their alliance, but increased their commitment to protecting Austrian space. Which was precisely why Imad found himself nervously preparing to disembark onto human station Delta 7, his environmental suit's internal moisture regulators working overtime to compensate for his anxiety. His epidermis, naturally soft and glistening with protective mucus, pressed uncomfortably against the suit's inner membrane. The special accommodation was necessary. Human environments were far too dry for Austrian physiology. As the airlock cycled, Imad's antennae twitched with their protective casings, sensing minute vibrations through the station's inner walls. The movements were different from Austrian stations. Harder, rougher, like the beat of heavy machinery rather than the gentle pulses of what he was accustomed to. Everything about human engineering felt angular and decisive, from the utilitarian gray corridors to the efficient LED lighting strips that lined them. The inner door slid open with a pressurized hiss, revealing a reception area that somehow managed to be both scary and welcoming. The humans had attempted to soften their natural inclination toward functionality with carefully placed plants and warm-toned wall panels, though the military-grade reinforcement was still visible beneath the aesthetic touches. 2 humans waited for him, Captain Lucas and Ambassador Relo, according to his briefing. Imad couldn't help but marvel at their rigid posture, the way they balanced precariously on just 2 legs. Their bodies seemed to move in segments, all hard angles and sharp movements, so different from his own fluid locomotion. The captain wore the crisp uniform of the human Space Force, his dark hair pulled back severely, while Ambassador Relo's attire was softer, though still distinctly formal by human standards. Ambassador Imad. Relo stepped forward with what Imad recognized as a human smile, though it still looked disconcertingly like a threat displayed to his instincts. Welcome to Delta 7. I trust your journey was comfortable? His tone was casual, almost friendly, contrasting with the serious circumstances of their meeting. Imad moved forward with dignity, his suit's locomotion assists helping him maintain what humans would consider a professional bearing. Ambassador Relo, Captain Lucas, he acknowledged, his translator rendering his chemical-based speech into clear human language. I appreciate your station's accommodation of my species' requirements. He tried to project the formal gravity appropriate for such a crucial diplomatic mission, even as Captain Lucas shifted his weight in what seemed like impatience. Oh, well, the environmental adaptations were no trouble. Lucas spoke directly, though his expression remained open. We've been upgrading our xenobiological support systems across all major stations, actually. He added with what Imad was learning to recognize as wry humor. Your requirements were simpler than the water-breathing Keltari delegation we hosted last month. Imad's antennae twitched again, betraying his surprise at his casual reference to such technical adaptations. On his homeworld, such discussions would have involved multiple committees and formal acknowledgments of effort. If you'll follow us, Relo gestured toward a corridor branching off the reception area. We've prepared the primary briefing room, unless you'd prefer to rest first. The question was posed with genuine consideration, not with the usual contempt other species used when addressing Austrian weak physiology and lack of stamina. I would prefer to proceed, Imad responded, perhaps too stiffly, but he couldn't help it. The weight of his mission pressed upon him. Somewhere in this station, in these conversations with humanity's representatives, lay the answer to the question that had brought him across 3 sectors of space. Why had humans alone chosen to stand with the Austrians while all others deemed them unworthy of protection? As they moved through the corridor, Imad noticed how Lucas and Rilo unconsciously adjusted their pace to match his slower progress. The captain's movements were precise and stiff, while the ambassador's gait was more fluid, yet both displayed an ease with their surroundings that Imad envied. They passed several crew members, who barely gave the unusual trio a second glance. A military captain, a human diplomat, and a slug-like alien in an environmental suit apparently being a common enough sight on this station. The briefing room revealed itself as another study in human contradictions. Robust communication equipment lined the walls, and reinforced furniture spoke of military utility, yet the lighting had been thoughtfully adjusted to a spectrum that eased the strain on his light-sensitive eyes. Most surprisingly, among the various xenomorphic accommodations stood a support cradle, perfectly adapted for the Austrian body structure. As Imad settled into the cradle, his antennae detected increasing activity through the station's walls, the subtle vibrations of personnel moving with heavy steps, the distant noise of what he assumed were training exercises. After minutes of small talk and resting, Captain Lucas noticed his sensory appendages twitching and smiled that peculiar human smile. "I hope you won't mind if we combine our security briefing with a tour of some key facilities," he said, already reaching for a data pad. "There's something specific I'd like to show you in our training simulation center." The ambassador's eyes rose slightly at this deviation from protocol, but Imad found himself intrigued. Every movement through this station, every interaction seemed to peel back another layer of the mystery he had come to solve. Perhaps understanding why humanity alone stood with his species meant understanding how they trained for that stand. "I would appreciate that very much, Captain," he replied, his translator rendering his chemical speech into human sounds while his body prepared for another journey through these strange and angular corridors. The path forward was full of activity as they left the briefing room behind. Imad's environmental suit glided smoothly across the deck plates, its locomotion assists adjusting to match the human's pace. "Latest intel suggests Parsog movement in Cathara sector," a voice carried from a passing group of officers, their faces drawn in concentration over shared datapads. "Third time this month they've probed our boundary." Relo caught Imad's reaction, a slight wavering in his forward motion that betrayed his species' instinctive fear response. "The Parsog Alliance has been increasingly aggressive," the ambassador acknowledged, his casual tone belied by the tension in his shoulders. "Not just toward Austrian space, but to ours as well." "They're testing our response times," Lucas added, his steps never faltering as he led them through a series of security checkpoints. Each door recognized his credentials instantly, sliding open with barely a pause in their progress. Pushing boundaries, gathering data, classic preparation tactics. A sudden burst of noise drew their attention to a side chamber where a group of pilots stood surrounded by circular displays. Their hands moved through combat sequences with great precision, their voices sharp with focus. "Bogey at 7-3 Mark II. Implementing theta pattern. Multiple contacts!" Imad found himself slowing, fascinated by the complexity of their movements. Unlike the Austrian defense forces, which relied heavily on automated systems, these humans seemed to be integrating themselves directly into their combat protocols. Their bodies moved in concert with their technology, neither fully organic nor purely mechanical. "Impressive, isn't it?" Lucas had stopped with him, his expression softening with what might have been pride. "We found that human intuition, properly trained and augmented, still outperforms fully automated systems in complex combat scenarios. The Parsog learned that the hard way in the Meridian skirmish." "The Meridian," Imad's translator caught for a moment on his surprise. "That was you? We'd heard the Parsog advance was halted there, but the details were classified." "Let's just say," Rilo interjected smoothly, "the humanity's commitment to the Austrian alliance isn't purely altruistic. The Parsog threat to your people is a threat to the stability of this entire sector. We've chosen to draw the line here." Through another series of corridors, they passed more training rooms, each offering glimpses of humanity's military preparation. In one, pilots maneuvered through virtual asteroid fields while simulated Parsog fighters attacked from multiple vectors. In another, tactical officers debated strategy around a three-dimensional map of contested space, their fingers tracing potential attack routes with what Imad considered alien efficiency. "Your species has an interesting approach to warfare," Imad observed, his antennae twitching as they detected the electromagnetic signatures of the simulation equipment. "Most galactic powers rely more heavily on technological superiority." Lucas's steps faltered for just a moment. "Technology is only as good as the strategy behind it," he said, his voice carrying an edge of what Imad learned to recognize as bitter experience. The Parsog also found that out at Meridian. They expected our automated defense systems, our predictable response patterns. Instead, they got... Instead? Rilo cut in with a warning glance at the captain, who was talking too much. They discovered that humanity's greatest military asset isn't our technology. He paused as they reached a set of heavy doors, these significantly more substantial than the others they'd passed. It's a combination of weapons, instinct, and immaculate war knowledge from thousands of years of military history. The doors parted to reveal the Advanced Combat Simulation Center, a vast chamber Imad instantly noticed was exuding energy. The air itself seemed charged with electricity, and Imad's skin tingled even through his environmental suit. Banks of equipment lined the walls, their displays showing various combat scenarios playing out in real time. But what caught Imad's attention wasn't the technology, it was the humans themselves. Dozens of them moved through the space with great precision, their actions synchronized yet somehow unpredictable. Each person seemed to be simultaneously following a careful protocol while ready to deviate from it at any moment. Tell me, Ambassador, Lucas said, his hand approaching a control panel, how familiar are you with human theories of asymmetric warfare? Because what you're about to see is it firsthand. Imad felt his skin ripple with anticipation beneath his environmental suit. Perhaps here, in this chamber of carefully controlled chaos, he would begin to understand why humanity had chosen such an unlikely species as an ally. As his mind wandered on that question, the simulation chamber revealed itself to be nothing like what Imad had expected. Where other species favored gleaming holograms and ethereal displays, the humans had built something remarkably physical. Solid metal and composite materials dominated the space. Banks of traditional screens lined the walls, their buttons and controls designed for direct manipulation rather than gesture interfaces. You seem surprised, Lucas noted, watching his antennae wave in apparent confusion. He crossed to a locked cabinet and pressed his palm against a biometric scanner. Most visitors expect something more advanced? Imad's translator rendered the word with just a hint of his cultural assumptions. Relo chuckled. We find tangible interfaces more reliable in combat situations, even training. Holograms are pretty, but try using one when your ship's been hit by an EMP burst. The cabinet opened with a solid click, revealing rows of what Imad recognized as projectile weapons, ancient technology by galactic standards, yet meticulously maintained. Lucas lifted one of the rifles, checking it with practiced movements before holding it out to Imad. Would you like to hold it? Imad hesitated. His environmental suit's manipulators were certainly capable, but handling weapons went against every diplomatic protocol he knew. Still, something in Lucas's expression suggested this was nothing too serious, so he accepted it. The weight surprised him when he took it. Even through the suit's feedback systems, he could feel the solid mass of it, the careful balance. This was not the elegant energy weapons favored by the Galactic Council. This was something older, more primitive. And yet... You maintain these manually? He asked, noticing the wear patterns that spoke of regular human contact. Every soldier maintains their own equipment, Lucas confirmed. He moved closer, adjusting Imad's grip slightly. These rifles have been in service for over 50 years. We upgrade the internals, but the basic design remains the same. Reliable, repairable, survivable. But why? The question escaped before Imad could contain it. Your species has access to more advanced technology. The Galactic Council's reports suggest you're capable of producing energy weapons that would make us more like them? Relo's voice carried no judgment, only curiosity. Imad's skin rippled with embarrassment beneath his suit. I meant no offense. I simply don't understand. First you maintain an alliance that others consider inefficient. Then I find you using technology that seems... primitive? Lucas supplied, but he was smiling. He took the rifle back, his movements displaying an intimacy with the weapon that spoke of years of practice. Let me show you something. Lucas led them to a workbench where a rifle lay partially disassembled. Tools were arranged neatly beside it, each bearing signs of regular use. When I was a cadet, my instructor told me something I've never forgotten. He said, technology doesn't win wars. People win wars. And people need tools they can trust, maintain, and repair in the field. Imad watched as he picked up a tool, demonstrating how easily a soldier could break down and reassemble the weapon. But surely automated systems are wonderful until they fail, Relo interjected. He'd been watching the demonstration with his arms crossed. Humanity learned some hard lessons in our early space conflicts. The more complex the system, the more catastrophic the failure. We're not Luddites, Lucas continued, his hands never stopping their maintenance routine. Our ships have AI assists, advanced targeting systems, all the modern conveniences, but when everything goes to shit, he patted the assembled rifle. We make sure our people can still fight. Something in his tone made Imad's antennae twitch. You speak from experience? A shadow passed across Lucas's face. Meridian wasn't one with advanced technology. It was won by soldiers who kept fighting after their primary systems were knocked out, who remembered their training when the AIs went dark after an energy core failure. He looked directly at Imad. They understood that survival sometimes means embracing apparent weakness as strength. The implications hung in the air between them. Imad felt his preconceptions shifting. Not shattering, but realigning. He looked around the chamber again, seeing it with new eyes. What he had initially dismissed as primitive, he now viewed with a hint of appreciation for its preparation for worst-case scenarios. All because of an alien species that refused to rely solely on technological superiority. Eventually, Imad spoke again, remembering something important. You still haven't answered my question, he said finally. Why maintain the alliance with my species when others see no strategic value in it? Lucas and Relo exchanged a glance that contained traces of unspoken communication. It was Relo who finally answered, his diplomatic polish giving way to something more genuine. Perhaps, he said, you should consider that we don't measure strategic value the same way the Council does. Before Lucas could elaborate on that cryptic statement, the chamber's lighting shifted to a deep red. The change was so sudden that Imad's antennae retracted defensively into their protective casings. A klaxon. Not the measured tones of a drill, but the harsh wail of genuine alarm cried through the air. The transformation in both humans was instant and total. Gone was Relo's diplomatic poise, replaced by focused alertness. Lucas's casual demeanor vanished as he slapped the weapons cabinet shut with one hand while reaching for his communicator with the other. Station Command, this is Lucas. Status? His voice carried none of the easy familiarity from moments before. The response came through garbled, static cutting through words. Multiple contacts! Shields failing! Parsog signatures confirmed. We are under attack! The deck beneath them shuddered violently. Imad's environmental suit compensated automatically, but he felt his body mass shift unpleasantly within it. Through his antennae, he could sense unfamiliar energy patterns rippling through the station's walls. Kinetic weapons fire. They're actually attacking a human station? The words escaped him in a burst of chemical signals that his translator struggled to keep up with. The Parsog wouldn't dare! Another impact cut him off. This time, the lights flickered and several of the training room's screens went dark. Emergency backup systems came to life, their vibrations adding to the cacophony of sensations overwhelming Imad's sensitive antennae. Command Center, Lucas said, already moving toward the exit. Now! It wasn't clear if he was speaking to Relo or Imad, or both, but the ambassador was already in motion, his diplomatic stride replaced by surprising speed. Imad found himself caught in their rush, his suit's locomotion assists straining to keep pace. The corridors that had seemed so orderly before had transformed into chaos. Emergency lights painted everything in shifting shadows as crew members rushed past them, each moving toward their stations despite the obvious tension in their movements. Port shield grid is down, the announcement cut through local communications. Engineering teams to sections 7 through 12, rerouting power from non-essential systems. They rounded a corner to find a sealed pressure door blocking their path. Lucas slammed his palm against the emergency override, but nothing happened. Systems are degrading, he muttered, pulling an access panel open. Relo, give me a hand with this. The ambassador moved without hesitation, helping him with the manual release mechanism. The sight of a diplomat performing emergency procedures with such familiarity added another layer of confusion to Imad's already overwhelmed senses. The door finally groaned open, revealing a corridor filled with thin smoke. Environmental systems whined as they fought to clear the air. Through the haze, Imad could see crew members helping others who seemed injured, their movements urgent but not panicked.
How did they get past the early warning systems?
Rilo's question came between his breaths as they continued their rush toward the command center.
They shouldn't have been able to.
Lucas replied when another impact rocked the station, this one closer. A panel exploded somewhere ahead of them, showering the corridor with sparks. Imad's suit registered a brief spike in temperature, automatically adjusting its cooling systems. Through the transparent sections of his environmental suit, Imad's skin had taken on the mottled coloration that his species displayed under extreme stress. The humans either didn't notice or chose not to comment as they helped him navigate around a section of fallen ceiling panels. They passed a viewport, and for a moment Imad caught a glimpse of space beyond the station. The sight made his locomotion assists stumble. Multiple Parsog vessels hung against the stars, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable. Energy weapons lanced between them and the station's remaining defensive systems.
"This isn't a raid,"
Imad heard himself say, his translator rendering his shock into flat human speech. "This is a full assault force."
"Questions later."
Lucas cut him off, pulling away from the viewport as another blast illuminated space. Command center's 2 sections ahead. Rilo, your diplomatic codes should still work on the primary access. The ambassador was already moving to the security panel beside a set of heavy doors, his fingers glued to the interface.
"Assuming systems are still..."
He cut off as the doors slid open with agonizing slowness, revealing the organized chaos of the station's combat control center beyond. Tactical displays covered the walls, many showing damage reports or tracking incoming threats. Officers constantly moved between stations, calling out status updates and damage reports. Through it all, Imad could sense the underlying vibrations of the station's overtaxed systems. Power fluctuations, shield harmonics, weapons charging cycles, all combining into a display of combat that his species had evolved to fear. As they stepped into the command center, Lucas was already shifting into his combat role, calling for status reports and issuing orders. Rilo moved toward the communications station, presumably to contact whatever authorities needed to be notified of this breach of galactic law. And Imad found himself frozen, his antennae withdrawn tight against his body, overwhelmed by the reality of what was happening. The Parsog Alliance hadn't just breached the peace, they had launched a direct assault on a distant human military installation. The implications were staggering. The potential consequences... "Ambassador," Lucas's voice cut through his spiral of thoughts. He had paused in his duties just long enough to address him, his expression grave but controlled. "I suggest you pay very close attention to what happens next. You're about to see exactly why humanity chose to stand with your people." The command center erupted with coordinated but rushed response as Lucas strode to the central tactical station. Imad's environmental suit remained locked in place, his body's chemical signals screaming for retreat while he watched the humans move with impressive precision through their combat protocols.
3 assault squadrons, heavy cruisers leading each formation, Lucas announced as he stared at a glowing red screen. "They're using our own sensor ghosts from the Meridian engagement. That's how they got so close."
Clever. There was something almost like admiration in his voice, even as he began issuing rapid-fire orders.
"Point defense grid at 60% capacity," a tactical officer reported. "Main power rebooting, but we're getting enough juice from the auxiliary."
Imad's antennae trembled as he sensed the massive energy transfers through the station's systems. The Austrian Defense Forces would have already begun evacuation procedures, their automated systems buying time for retreat. But the humans...
"They're spreading out,"
Rilo observed from beside him, the ambassador's diplomatic polish giving way to tactical assessment.
"Classic encirclement pattern."
"No," Lucas countered, his eyes narrowing at the display. "Look at their velocity vectors. This isn't about surrounding us. They're positioning for something else." He straightened suddenly. "They think we'll run. And they're setting up to cut off that route." Through his fear-induced paralysis, Imad watched as the humans smiled, a sharp, predatory expression that made his skin ripple with instinctive unease.
Helm, full power to maneuvering thrusters. Make it look like we're having trouble maintaining position. Weapons, I want all batteries charged but powered down. Make it look like that first hit did more damage than it did. Playing wounded? Relo asked, moving to a communication station with surprising familiarity for a diplomat. Playing predictable, Lucas corrected. The Parsog based their entire strategy at Meridian on our expected responses. They're doing the same thing here. He turned to address the command crew. All stations, battle protocol, Theta 7. They want a panicked retreat? Let's give them something else to think about. Imad felt his translator glitch as he tried to process the rapid exchanges. His species' natural instinct for self-preservation made it difficult to comprehend the humans' apparent eagerness to engage. Around him, crew members coordinated with an efficiency that spoke of endless drills and absolute trust in their commands. Enemy squadrons maintaining approach vectors, Tactical reported. Reading power spikes consistent with weapon charging sequences. Hold position, Lucas ordered, his voice carrying absolute authority. Let them think we're struggling with systems damage. Wait for them to commit. Imad's body twisted within his suit as another impact rattled the station, but the humans barely seemed to notice. Their hands remained steady on their controls, their voices calm as they reported status updates and damage assessments. He found himself remembering every diplomatic briefing, every strategic assessment that had dismissed his species as lacking the necessary aggression for effective military action. They're accelerating, Relo reported, his diplomatic reserve completely abandoned in favor of military precision. All 3 squadrons, closing to engagement range. Not yet, Lucas murmured, watching the tactical display with predatory focus. Wait for it. Wait. His hand slamming the command interface. Now! All batteries, full power. Helm, emergency thrust port side. Hit their center squadron before they can react. The station's response was immediate and overwhelming. Energy that had been carefully hidden surged through systems that only appeared damaged. Weapons that had seemed offline opened up with devastating accuracy on the unexpected Parsog vessels. Through his antennae, Imad felt the massive power transfers that his species would have considered too risky, too aggressive to attempt. Direct hits on their lead cruiser, Tactical called out with professional satisfaction. Their formation is breaking apart. They expected us to run, Lucas said, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction as he watched the Parsog squadrons scatter in confusion. Just like they expected the Austrians to run. But humanity learned a long time ago. Sometimes the best defense is to strike back hard. The words hit Imad with physical force. He understood now, with brutal clarity, why the other species had abandoned his people to their fate. It wasn't just about physical capabilities or technological advancement. It was about this capacity for controlled aggression, this ability to transform fear into action. His body remained frozen in its fear response, chemical signals still screaming for retreat, while around him humans coordinated their counterattack with unimaginable precision. The difference between their species had never been more apparent, more devastating in its implications. The Parsog fleet's retreat left an eerie quiet in the station's combat control center. Imad's antennae slowly extended from their protective casings, sensing the changed vibrations throughout the station. The frantic energy transfers of combat had been replaced by the steady noise of damage control systems and emergency protocols. Confirmed hits on 2 of their heavy cruisers, Tactical reported, their voice hoarse from calling out combat updates. The 3rd squadron's covering their withdrawal. They're falling back to the sector boundary. Lucas nodded, but Imad noticed he didn't share the crew's relief. His eyes remained fixed on the damage reports scrolling across his display. Casualties? Medical reporting 17 injured from the initial impact, 3 critical. Relo's diplomatic polish had completely fallen away. Section 7 took heavy damage. Emergency teams are having trouble reaching. Permission to assist? The words left Imad before he could process them, his translator rendering them in clear, urgent tones. Both humans turned to look at him, and he realized he had moved from his frozen position for the first time since the battle began. Lucas studied him for a moment, then nodded sharply. "Relo, take him to medical. They can use all the help they can get." He turned back to his tactical display. "I need to coordinate with command about this breach of treaty space." The journey to medical took them through corridors that bore fresh battle scars. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh shadows, and the deck plates thrummed with the vibrations of overtaxed systems. But what struck Imad most was the smell. His environmental suit's sensors detected traces of burned materials, smoke from ruptured power conduits, and beneath it all, the unmistakable scent of human blood. They found medical in controlled chaos. The main treatment area had overflowed into adjacent corridors where makeshift triage stations handled the walking wounded. Through the transparent sections of his suit, Imad's skin rippled at the sight of injured humans, their resilient bodies showing their vulnerability at last. A nurse hurried past, arms full of medical supplies. Without thinking, Imad extended his suit's manipulators to catch a roll of bandages that slipped from her grasp. She paused just long enough to nod thanks before rushing on. "Over here!" The call came from a doctor kneeling beside a wounded engineer. "I need pressure on this wound while I prepare the regenerator." Imad moved before Relo could respond. His environmental suit's manipulators were steadier than human hands, designed for precise control rather than strength. He pressed the bandage exactly where indicated, his species' natural sensitivity to pressure allowing him to maintain perfectly consistent force. "Good," the doctor said without looking up. "Keep that steady." She worked quickly, her movements efficient but not rushed. "You're the Austrian ambassador?" "Yes," Imad replied, his translator barely keeping up with the rapid exchange. "I have some xenobiology medical training. All our diplomats do." He didn't add that it was mostly theoretical in his case. "Excellent. We need all the steady hands we can get." She finished with the regenerator and moved to check the bandage. "Perfect pressure control. Can you help with other compression wounds?" For the next hour, Imad moved from patient to patient. His suit's manipulators proved ideal for maintaining precise pressure, freeing human hands for more complex procedures. He found himself working in seamless coordination with the medical team, his fear response completely forgotten in the focus of helping others, something that went against his instinct, like all the fighting. "You're good at this," Relo observed during a brief lull. The ambassador had been helping too, his diplomatic skills turned to comforting the injured and coordinating supplies. Imad's skin shifted colors, in what was his species' equivalent of embarrassment. "The pressure sensitivity. It's just how we're made. Nothing special." "Exactly," Relo said with what seemed like particular emphasis. "It's how you're made. Just like our ability to fight is how we're made." He gestured around the medical bay. "Look at this. We won the battle, yes, but we're not invincible. We need more than just warriors." The implications of those words hit Imad with surprising force. He watched the medical team work, humans using their strength and decisiveness to save lives rather than take them. He remembered how his own supposedly weak traits had proven unexpectedly valuable in the post-battle. "Your species chose to stand with us," he said slowly, his chemical signals forming the words with new understanding. "Not because you failed to see our weaknesses, but because we recognized your strengths," Relo finished. "Different species, different capabilities. The Parsog and their allies see that as a reason for division. We see it as an opportunity for cooperation." He paused as Lucas entered the medical bay, his command duties temporarily satisfied. He surveyed the scene, noting Imad's position among the medical team with apparent approval. "Status?" "All critical cases stabilized," the doctor reported. "Thanks in part to our ambassador here. Those manipulators are better than any surgical assistant for maintaining steady pressure." Lucas nodded, unsurprised. "Good work, Ambassador." He looked around the medical bay, at humans and a single Austrian working together to heal the battle's wounds. "Still wondering why we maintained the alliance?" Imad's antennae waved in a negative gesture. For the first time since arriving on the station, he felt he truly understood. Not just why humanity had stood with his species, but why that choice made them stronger, even if just by a little. Hours later, as the station's systems slowly returned to a somewhat normal operation, Imad found himself back in the briefing room where his journey had began. The space felt different. Not just a room designed with careful consideration for alien physiology, but a symbol of something deeper.
The Galactic Council sees strength only in terms of military power,
Relo said, his diplomatic polish returned but now underlaid with proven substance.
They abandoned your species because they saw you as just a burden.
But humanity did not,
Imad replied, his translator rendering the words with newfound confidence. Through his environmental suit, his skin displayed patterns of understanding rather than fear.
You saw something they missed.
Relo smiled and nodded in agreement. Imad understood at last. His mission to discover why humanity stood with his species had revealed something far more profound. A future where different beings could complement each other's capabilities rather than compete to prove their worth. His skin rippled with the colors of certainty as he prepared to share this revelation with the rest of his species, who remained wary of humanity. Relo extended his hand for a handshake, and Imad mirrored the gesture as understanding dawned upon him. At last he realized the truth. The Ustrians were not a species in need of protection. They were invaluable allies, bringing unique strengths to a partnership with humanity. In that truth lay a power far greater than the Parsog Alliance or the Council could ever comprehend.